The studio lights blazed down on the congressional hearing room, cameras positioned strategically to capture every expression, every gesture. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, her bright red blazer a stark contrast to the somber wood paneling behind her. Her eyes locked onto former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, sitting across the room, who adjusted her position nervously, sensing what was coming. "What we're about to show you has never been seen before," Crockett announced, her voice steady but charged with purpose. "Miss Bondi has spent months attacking the Justice Department, claiming political persecution. But I have evidence that will expose what's really been happening behind closed doors." The room fell silent as Crockett held up a folder marked "Confidential." Bondi's expression shifted from confident to concerned in an instant. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table as she leaned forward, microphone catching her, whispered, "That's not possible," to her legal counsel. Crockett's voice cut through the tension. "You claimed there was no evidence. You told the American people this was all political theater, but the documents in my hand tell a very different story, Ms. Bondi." Camera operators zoomed in tight on Bondi's face as beads of sweat formed at her temples. This wasn't the hearing she had prepared for. This wasn't supposed to happen. The committee chairman tried to interject, but Crockett was already walking toward Bondi, document in hand. "The American people deserve to know what you've been hiding, and today they're finally going to hear the truth." Before diving into this explosive confrontation, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss our breaking political coverage. Turn on notifications to be the first to see political showdowns like you've never witnessed before. Pam Bondi had built her career on being unshakable. A former Florida Attorney General known for her tough stance on crime and unwavering defense of conservative principles, she had become a familiar face on news networks, her blonde hair always perfectly styled, her statements always calculated. Bondi had mastered the art of political combat. For years, she had served as one of the most effective defenders of the previous administration. Her legal background gave her arguments weight, and her confident delivery made her a formidable opponent in any debate. When allegations surfaced about potential legal violations, Bondi had been the first to appear on television, calling it the greatest political witch hunt in history. "This Justice Department is weaponized," she had declared on multiple occasions, her voice filled with righteous indignation. "They're targeting political enemies while ignoring real crimes." Her messaging had been effective, creating doubt in the minds of millions of Americans about the legitimacy of the investigations. But sitting across from her today was someone equally formidable, though with a very different story. Jasmine Crockett wasn't supposed to be here. A former public defender from Dallas who had risen through Texas politics before winning a seat in Congress, she represented everything Bondi had spent her career fighting against. Where Bondi spoke of law and order, Crockett spoke of justice reform. Where Bondi defended the establishment, Crockett challenged it. What made Crockett dangerous wasn't just her Harvard law degree or her skill as a former defense attorney, it was that she had done her homework. For months, while Bondi made the rounds on television, Crockett had been quietly gathering information, building a case, and waiting for the perfect moment to reveal what she knew. The hearing room was packed. Committee members from both parties sat stiffly, aware that the cameras were capturing every reaction. Behind them, rows of staffers, journalists, and members of the public leaned forward, not wanting to miss a word. Outside, protesters from both sides of the political spectrum held signs, their chants occasionally audible even through the thick walls of the building. This wasn't just another congressional hearing. This was a battle for credibility, for narrative control, for public trust. If Bondi was right, the foundations of American justice were being corrupted for political gain. If Crockett was right, Bondi had been knowingly misleading the American people to protect powerful interests. The stakes couldn't be higher. The Justice Department's reputation, the integrity of the legal system, and the public's already fragile trust in government institutions all hung in the balance. As Crockett approached with the document, an aide whispered something in Bondi's ear. Her eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her carefully constructed facade. For the first time, doubt crept into her expression. "Ms. Bondi," Crockett began, her voice now amplified by the microphone, "you've appeared on television 37 times in the past 3 months, claiming that there is zero evidence of wrongdoing. Is that correct?" Bondi leaned toward her microphone. Yes, and I stand by that statement. And you've specifically stated that the Justice Department is engaging in, quote, unprecedented political persecution, correct? Absolutely, Bondi replied, her confidence seemingly returning. The American people can see right through this charade. Crockett nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Then I'd like to understand how you explain these documents. The room held its breath. Before I show these documents, Crockett said, pacing deliberately in front of the committee dais, I want to establish something critical for the record. She turned to face Bondi directly. Mrs. Bondi, on March 17th of this year, did you appear on National News Network and state, and I quote, I have reviewed all evidence in this case and there is absolutely nothing there. Bondi shifted in her seat, cleared her throat, and leaned into her microphone. Yes, Congresswoman, that's correct. I reviewed what was publicly available and... I'm not finished, Crockett cut in, her voice firm but controlled. On April 2nd, did you also state on Morning America that, quote, this Justice Department is corrupt to the core and fabricating evidence to target political opponents? I did say that, yes, Bondi responded, a hint of defiance returning to her voice. And I stand by it. The American people deserve to know when their justice system is being weaponized. Crockett nodded, her expression grave. And finally, on May 10th, just 3 weeks ago, did you publicly declare that, quote, if there was any real evidence, we would have seen it by now. The fact that they're hiding everything tells you all you need to know? That's correct, Bondi said, folding her hands on the table. Transparency is essential in a democracy, wouldn't you agree, Congresswoman? A thin smile crossed Crockett's face as she placed the folder on the table. On that, Miss Bondi, we are in complete agreement. The committee chairman, sensing the tension rising, interjected. Congresswoman Crockett, you have limited time for questioning. Please proceed to your point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Crockett responded, opening the folder. Miss Bondi, I'm now entering into the record a series of emails recovered through a Freedom of Information Act request. These emails were sent between you and several subjects of the current Justice Department investigation. Murmurs rippled through the hearing room. Photographers' cameras clicked rapidly as they captured Bondi's expression shifting. I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit A, Crockett continued, projecting an email onto the large screen visible to everyone in the room. This is an email dated January 12th, sent from your personal account to Mr. James Harrington, who is currently under indictment. In it, you write, and I quote, the documents need to be moved immediately. Use the secure protocol we discussed. Bondi's attorney leaned in to whisper something, but she waved him off. That email is taken completely out of context, Congresswoman. Mr. Harrington was a client, and this falls under attorney privilege. Interesting you should mention that, Crockett replied, sliding to the next exhibit. Because in this email chain from February 3rd, you specifically write that you are acting as an advisor, not as legal counsel, to avoid disclosure requirements. Would you like to clarify which one it is, Ms. Bondi? The room grew tense as Bondi took a long sip of water. These are cherry-picked communications that don't reflect the full context of Exhibit C, Crockett interrupted, displaying another document. This is a text message exchange between you and Mr. Harrington after the first subpoenas were issued. You wrote, and I quote, deny everything, they have nothing concrete. I've been assured by my contacts that this will go away. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Several committee members leaned forward, straining to read the projected messages. Who exactly were these contacts that assured you federal investigations would go away, Miss Bondi? Crockett asked, her voice cutting through the murmurs. I refuse to respond to selectively edited messages that violate privacy and... Privacy? Crockett's voice rose slightly. Like the privacy you violated when you leaked confidential investigation details to the press? Because Exhibit D shows you forwarding internal Justice Department memos to 3 different news outlets on April 7th. The chairman banged his gavel as the room erupted. Order! We will have order! Bondi's face had paled considerably. Her attorney was now frantically writing notes, which she ignored. Ms. Bondi, Crockett continued once the room quieted, these documents establish a pattern of behavior that directly contradicts your public statements. While telling the American people there was no evidence, you were actively advising subjects of the investigation on how to conceal information from investigators. That is an outrageous mischaracterization, Bondi shot back, color returning to her face as anger replaced shock. I've dedicated my career to upholding the law, and I won't sit here and let you twist. "I'm not twisting anything," Crockett replied calmly, sliding another document onto the projector. "These are your words. This is a memo you authored on March 30th, outlining what you call a media strategy to discredit the investigation. It specifically mentions using terms like witch hunt and deep state to undermine public confidence in the Justice Department." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "But what I find most troubling," Crockett said, her voice now quieter but somehow more commanding, "is Exhibit F. This is an email from you to Mr. Harrington dated April 15th where you write, 'I know for a fact they have the financial records. The transfers to the Cayman accounts are documented. We need a different strategy.'" Bondi's composure cracked visibly. Her hand trembled as she reached again for the water glass. "Miss Bondi," Crockett said, looking directly at her, "you've told the American people repeatedly that there was no evidence of financial impropriety. You called the allegations fabricated. Yet in your private communications you acknowledge not only that the evidence exists, but that it's substantial enough to require a different strategy. How do you explain this contradiction?" The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Every eye was fixed on Bondi, waiting for her response. Bondi's attorney finally managed to get her attention, whispering urgently in her ear. She nodded slightly, then leaned toward her microphone. "Mr. Chairman, in light of these new documents being introduced without proper notice to counsel, I request a recess to review the materials before responding further." The chairman looked to Crockett, who shook her head slightly. "Ms. Bondi has made dozens of public statements about this matter. I'm simply asking her to reconcile those statements with her own words in these documents. If she needs time to craft a new narrative, that speaks volumes." "I am not crafting narratives," Bondi snapped, momentarily losing her cool. "I'm asking for basic procedural fairness." The chairman glanced at his watch. "We'll take a 15-minute recess and then continue with questioning." As the gavel banged, cameras caught Bondi in heated conversation with her legal team, her usual poise completely abandoned. Across the room, Crockett gathered her documents calmly, fully aware that she had just seized control of the hearing and that the real confrontation was yet to come. The recess did little to calm the atmosphere. If anything, the tension had intensified as reporters rushed to file initial stories about the explosive revelations. Social media was already flooded with clips of the exchange, Bondi emails trending nationwide within minutes. When the hearing resumed, Bondi appeared to have regained some composure, but the confidence that had defined her public persona was noticeably diminished. Her legal team had grown from one attorney to three, all huddled around her with stacks of hastily printed documents. "Congresswoman Crockett," the chairman began, "you may continue your questioning." Crockett rose slowly, her expression solemn. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bondi, during the recess, did you have an opportunity to review the exhibits I presented?" "I did," Bondi replied, her voice slightly hoarse. "And I want to be clear that these documents represent incomplete exchanges that—" "Bondi," Crockett interrupted, "is that your signature on the memo dated March 30th? A pause. "Yes, but— and are those your words in the email acknowledging the existence of financial records showing transfers to Cayman accounts?" Bondi conferred quickly with her attorneys. One shook his head vigorously, but she turned back to the microphone. "Those words were written in a hypothetical context, discussing potential defense strategies for my client based on various scenarios. Any attorney would—" "So, you're claiming you were hypothetically discussing evidence you told the American people didn't exist?" Crockett asked, incredulity evident in her voice. "I'm saying that attorneys explore all possibilities when representing clients. That's our job." Crockett nodded thoughtfully. "Let's move to Exhibit G then." The room tensed as a new document appeared on screen. It was a photograph showing Bondi with Mr. Harrington and three other individuals currently under investigation, all gathered around a table covered with documents. This image was taken on February 8th at a property in West Palm Beach, Crockett explained. According to metadata from the photo, which was recovered from Mr. Harrington's cloud storage, this meeting occurred 3 days after you publicly stated you had no involvement whatsoever with Mr. Harrington's financial matters. Bondi stared at the image, visibly shaken. "Would you like to revise your previous statement about your involvement, Ms. Bondi?" Crockett asked. The attorney to Bondi's right leaned in desperately, but Bondi pushed him away, a flash of anger crossing her face. "These are selective disclosures designed to create a false impression," she said, voice rising. "What about all the times I've advocated for transparency in government? What about my record as Attorney General? Are we just going to ignore that because of some emails taken out of context?" "We're not here to discuss your entire career, Ms. Bondi," Crockett replied evenly. "We're here to address specific contradictions between your public statements and private actions regarding this investigation." "This is nothing but a political hit job," Bondi declared, color rising in her cheeks. "Just like I've been saying all along." "Is that why you wrote this?" Crockett asked, displaying a final document. It was a strategy memo with Bondi's name at the top, containing the line, "When evidence emerges, attack the process, attack the investigators, create confusion about the facts." The room erupted again, requiring multiple strikes of the chairman's gavel to restore order. For a moment, Bondi appeared genuinely lost for words, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling in real time before the cameras and the American public. The hearing room had transformed from a formal congressional venue into what felt like the final act of a high-stakes courtroom drama. Staffers who normally remained stoic during proceedings were now fully engrossed, their faces reflecting the tension building with each revelation. Even veteran journalists who had covered Washington for decades sat forward in their seats, fingers hovering over keyboards, sensing they were witnessing a historic moment. "Ms. Bondi," Crockett continued, her voice taking on the measured cadence she had once used in courtrooms as a defense attorney, "I want to be perfectly clear about what we've established today." She held up one finger. "First, you repeatedly told the American people there was no evidence of wrongdoing, while privately acknowledging that evidence existed." A second finger went up. "Second, you coordinated with subjects of an active investigation on strategies to conceal information from the Justice Department." A third finger. "Third, you deliberately leak selective information to media outlets to shape public perception while condemning leaks that didn't serve your narrative." A fourth finger. "And fourth, you documented strategies to undermine the investigation by attacking the process rather than addressing the substance of the allegations." Bondi's legal team was now in disarray, papers shuffling frantically as they struggled to mount any kind of coherent defense. Bondi herself sat rigidly, her expression hardening into what appeared to be anger, but the tremor in her hand as she reached again for water betrayed her true emotional state. "I have a simple question, Miss Bondi," Crockett said, lowering her voice to ensure everyone would have to listen carefully. "Why should the American people believe anything you say about this investigation when your own words prove you've been deliberately misleading them?" The silence that followed was deafening. Committee members exchanged glances. Photographers' cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the moment from every angle. Bondi leaned into her microphone, then pulled back, consulting with her attorneys. After a whispered conference, she straightened her shoulders and faced Crockett. "Congresswoman, these documents represent fragments of complex legal discussions. As an attorney yourself, you should understand that exploring various scenarios and strategies is part of providing thorough representation. I have always acted within ethical boundaries and—" "That wasn't my question," Crockett interrupted, her tone remaining measured but firm. "I asked why Americans should believe your public statements when your private communications directly contradict them." "I don't accept the premise of your question," Bondi replied, a flash of her old defiance returning. "You're presenting selective information to create a misleading narrative." Crockett smiled slightly. "Interesting choice of words, Ms. Bondi. Selective information to create a misleading narrative. That's precisely what Exhibit H describes as your media strategy." She projected a new document, which outlined in bullet points: selective disclosure, control the narrative, question motivations of investigators, emphasized political aspects over legal substance. "Did you author this strategy document, Ms. Bondi?" Bondi's attorney placed a hand on her arm, but she shook it off. "I've had enough of this charade," she declared, voice rising. "This entire hearing is nothing but political theater designed to distract from the real issues facing—" "The real issue, Ms. Bondi," Crockett cut in, her voice suddenly sharp, "is that you've been caught, not in a political debate, not in a difference of opinion. You've been caught deliberately misleading the American people about matters of law and evidence." Crockett walked closer to Bondi's table, maintaining eye contact. These aren't my interpretations. These are your words, your signature, your strategy, your deception. The chairman attempted to intervene. Congresswoman, please direct your comments through the chairman. Mr. Chairman, Crockett responded without breaking her gaze from Bondi, I believe the witness should be allowed to respond directly to the evidence. Bondi's composure finally broke completely. You want a response? Fine. You've orchestrated this entire spectacle because you're terrified of what we represent. You obtained those documents illegally and you know it. This committee has no jurisdiction over. We obtained these documents through legal FOIA requests and from witnesses cooperating with ongoing investigations. Crockett corrected calmly, and if you're concerned about legality, perhaps we should discuss the federal statutes regarding obstruction of justice and witness tampering referenced in Exhibit I. As the new document appeared on screen, Bondi's face visibly paled. It was an email where she had written, "Make sure Johnson understands what happens to people who cooperate with this witch hunt. His future opportunities would be severely limited." The room gasped collectively. One committee member removed his glasses in shock. Another whispered, "Jesus Christ," into a hot microphone. Bondi's primary attorney was now on his feet. Mr. Chairman, I must insist on a recess. My client has been ambushed with materials we haven't had proper time to review and— Sit down, counsel, Bondi hissed, visibly trembling now. I don't need a recess. She turned back to Crockett, eyes blazing. You think you've won something here today? You think this changes anything? The American people aren't fooled by your selective editing and political games. The American people are watching you melt down rather than answer simple questions about your own words, Crockett replied, her composure a stark contrast to Bondi's disintegration. They're watching you attack me instead of explaining why you said one thing in public and something completely different in private. Bondi pushed her microphone away forcefully. I don't have to sit here and— Actually, you do, Crockett interrupted. You're under subpoena, Ms. Bondi. But if you'd prefer to continue this conversation with federal prosecutors rather than with Congress, I'm sure that can be arranged. The implication hung in the air like a thundercloud. Bondi stared at Crockett, then at the chairman, then back at her attorneys, who appeared as stunned as everyone else in the room. I'd like to respond to the allegations, Bondi finally said, her voice suddenly much quieter. The room fell silent again. Crockett returned to her seat, nodding for Bondi to continue. I have dedicated my professional life to upholding the law, Bondi began, her voice unsteady. The communications presented today represent difficult decisions made under extraordinary circumstances. When I spoke publicly about the investigation, I was conveying my genuine belief that the overall narrative being presented by the Justice Department was misleading and politically motivated. She paused, glancing at her attorneys, who offered no visible guidance. I acknowledge that some of my statements may appear inconsistent with private communications, but context matters. As attorneys, we often discuss worst-case scenarios and how to address them. That doesn't mean we believe those scenarios reflect reality. Crockett waited a moment, then leaned toward her microphone. Bondi, Exhibit F isn't a worst-case scenario discussion. It's you explicitly acknowledging the existence of financial records that you publicly claim didn't exist. You wrote, and I quote again, I know for a fact they have the financial records. The transfers to the Cayman accounts are documented. She let the words hang in the air before continuing. Those aren't hypotheticals. Those are statements of fact from you to a subject of investigation, warning him that evidence you publicly denied existed actually did exist. How do you reconcile that with what you just told this committee? Bondi opened her mouth to respond, closed it, then opened it again. For perhaps the first time in her public career, she appeared genuinely at a loss for words. Her primary attorney finally stood. Mr. Chairman, at this time, my client wishes to assert her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Self-incrimination. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters rushed for the doors to file updates. Committee members shouted questions. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order that wouldn't come. Through it all, Crockett remained seated, watching Bondi with an expression of solemn vindication. Their eyes met across the room. Crockett steady and resolute, Bondi's finally brimming with tears of rage and humiliation. The chairman finally managed to restore some semblance of order. In light of the witness's decision to invoke the Fifth Amendment, this portion of the hearing will conclude. The committee will reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. to consider next steps. As the gavel banged one final time, cameras caught the full tableau. Bondi slumped in her chair, mascara beginning to run down her cheeks as she conferred urgently with her legal team. Committee members gathering in shocked clusters, and Jasmine Crockett methodically organizing her documents, the quiet triumph of truth written across her face. The hearing room had emptied, but America was just beginning to process what it had witnessed. Within an hour, every major news network had interrupted regular programming to analyze the unprecedented confrontation between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and former Attorney General Pam Bondi. "In my 30 years covering Washington," said veteran political analyst Richard Thornton on National News Network, "I have never seen a more complete dismantling of a public figure's credibility in real time. What we witnessed today wasn't just political theater, it was the exposure of a coordinated attempt to mislead the American people about matters of law and evidence." Social media platforms nearly crashed under the weight of activity. Bondi breakdown and Crockett receipts became the top trending hashtags worldwide, with clips of the most dramatic moments being shared millions of times. The full hearing video on C-SPAN's website recorded more concurrent viewers than any congressional proceeding in history, surpassing even the most famous impeachment hearings. Outside the Capitol building, crowds had formed spontaneously as news of the confrontation spread. Supporters of both Crockett and Bondi faced off across First Street, their chants creating a cacophony that served as the soundtrack to live news reports. "This is a witch hunt," shouted Bondi supporters. "Lock her up," came the response from across the street, the irony of the chant's origin lost on no one. Back inside the Capitol complex, both women had retreated to separate rooms with their respective teams. The contrasting scenes could not have been more dramatic. In a small conference room on the House side, Crockett sat surrounded by staff members, all focused intently on their task. There was no champagne, no celebration, only the quiet, methodical work of people who knew they had done their job but understood that this was just the beginning. "We need to prepare for tomorrow's session," Crockett instructed her chief of staff. "They'll try to discredit the documents overnight, make sure our chain of custody is ironclad, and get me the full witness list for the next round." A junior staffer looked up from her phone. "Congressman, you're trending #1 worldwide. The clips have already been viewed over 20 million times. Crockett nodded, but didn't smile. "That's not why we did this. Focus on the next steps, not the attention." Across the building, in a secure room normally reserved for classified briefings, the scene surrounding Bondi was chaotic. Now, expanded to 5 attorneys, her legal team argued heatedly among themselves, while Bondi sat silently, staring at her reflection in a darkened phone screen. "The fifth was the only option," one lawyer insisted. "It made her look guilty as hell," another countered. "She was guilty as hell," a third shot back, before catching himself and lowering his voice. "I mean, the optics were already devastating. We had to stop the bleeding." Bondi finally looked up, her mascara streaked across her cheeks, but her eyes now hard and focused. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here," she said, her voice low but commanding. "This isn't over. Crockett thinks she's won, but she has no idea what she's started." Her primary attorney approached cautiously. "Pam, we need to discuss your legal exposure here. Some of those communications potentially constitute—" "I don't want to hear about legal exposure," Bondi cut him off. "I want to hear about our counter-strategy. Crockett didn't find those documents by accident. Someone gave them to her, someone betrayed me, and I want to know who." As the lawyers exchanged uncomfortable glances, Bondi's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed pirate number. She stared at it for a moment before answering. "This is Bondi." The voice on the other end spoke for nearly a minute while Bondi listened, her expression changing from anger to concern to something approaching fear. When the caller finished, she simply said, "I understand," and ended the call. The lawyers waited expectantly, but Bondi offered no explanation. Instead, she stood abruptly. "We're done for today. I need to make some calls in private." As she gathered her belongings, one of the younger attorneys worked up the courage to ask what everyone was thinking. "Miss Bondi, what are we telling the press? They're camped outside every exit." Bondi paused at the door, her composure partially restored through sheer force of will. "Tell them I look forward to setting the record straight tomorrow. Tell them Congresswoman Crockett has seriously overplayed her hand. Tell them." She trailed off, then smiled thinly. "Tell them whatever you want. It doesn't matter anymore." With that cryptic statement, she was gone, leaving her legal team to exchange bewildered looks. By evening, the story had evolved from a congressional confrontation to something approaching a national reckoning. Analyses of the documents Crockett had presented revealed connections to other high-profile figures, suggesting the deception extended far beyond Bondi herself. "What we're potentially looking at," explained a legal expert on Evening Update, "is a coordinated effort to obstruct justice that involves multiple former officials, private attorneys, and possibly even current government employees. The emails Congresswoman Crockett introduced today may be just the tip of the iceberg." The Justice Department released a terse statement indicating they were reviewing the new information presented in today's congressional hearing, but declined further comment on what was now clearly an expanding investigation. At 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time, Jasmine Crockett held a brief press conference on the Capitol steps. Unlike the dramatic confrontation earlier in the day, her demeanor was now calm and statesmanlike. Today wasn't about political victory, she told the assembled reporters. It was about accountability and truth. For months, the American people have been told there was no evidence of wrongdoing, that investigations were politically motivated, that concerns about financial improprieties were fabricated. Those claims were false, and the American people deserve to know that. A reporter shouted from the crowd, "Congresswoman, do you think Bondi should face criminal charges?" Crockett's expression remained measured. "That's not for me to decide. My role was to bring these contradictions to light. The appropriate legal authorities will determine what happens next." Another voice called out, "What do you say to claims this was a political hit job?" "I would say, watch the hearing," Crockett replied simply. "These weren't my words that exposed Ms. Bondi. They were her own. When someone tells you who they are, believe them the first time." As night fell on Washington, the political landscape had shifted tectonically. News programs ran side-by-side images of Bondi from just weeks earlier, confident, commanding, dismissive of allegations, contrasted with her broken expression as she invoked the Fifth Amendment. Commentary across the political spectrum ranged from vindication to outrage, but one sentiment was nearly universal. Something fundamental had changed in how this story would be told going forward. The next morning dawned with a stunning development. Major news outlets reported that Pam Bondi had not returned to her hotel the previous night. Her legal team issued a statement saying she was taking time to consult with family and additional counsel and would not appear at the congressional hearing scheduled for 10:00 a.m. By 9:30 a.m., rumors began circulating that Bondi had left the country. Flight records later confirmed that a private jet had departed from a small airfield in Maryland shortly after midnight, bound for a destination in the Caribbean. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the congressional committee reconvened. Crockett took her seat, calm and prepared as ever, a stark contrast to the empty chair where Bondi was supposed to be sitting. The chairman opened the session solemnly. "The committee has been informed that Ms. Bondi will not be appearing today. Her counsel has indicated that she requires time for further legal consultation. This committee will be issuing a referral to the Department of Justice regarding potential contempt charges, in addition to the substantive concerns raised by yesterday's revelations." He turned to Crockett. "Congressman, as the member who introduced these documents into the record, do you have any additional statement for the committee at this time?" Crockett nodded and leaned toward her microphone. "Mr. Chairman, what we witnessed yesterday wasn't just the breakdown of one individual's credibility. It was the collapse of a carefully constructed narrative designed to shield powerful people from accountability." She looked directly into the main camera. "Ms. Bondi's absence today speaks volumes. But even more telling are the additional documents I've received overnight from whistleblowers who were inspired by yesterday's hearing to come forward. These new materials suggest that the deception was far more widespread than initially understood." The room buzzed with anticipation as Crockett held up a new folder. With the committee's permission, I would like to enter these into the record and continue the work of bringing truth to light. By that evening, Bondi Fleece was trending worldwide, alongside Crockett Crusher and cable news. News helicopters circled the Caribbean island where Bondi's plane had landed, capturing footage of a beachfront property surrounded by local security. On financial news networks, analysts reported unusual trading patterns in stocks connected to companies mentioned in the new documents Crockett had introduced. "We're seeing what appears to be informed selling," noted one expert. "People with inside knowledge are clearly trying to get ahead of whatever comes next." In Washington, additional congressional committees announced plans to launch their own investigations, while the Justice Department upgraded its earlier statement, now confirming that a special counsel had been appointed to investigate potential obstruction of justice and witness tampering as revealed in recent congressional testimony. 3 days after the initial confrontation, Jasmine Crockett appeared on Sunday morning political programs, her newfound national prominence evident in the deferential treatment from hosts who had previously dismissed her as a junior congresswoman with limited influence. "Looking back at this week," asked veteran host Michael Stern, "did you anticipate the level of impact your questioning would have?" Crockett considered the question carefully. "I knew the documents spoke for themselves. I knew they revealed a profound betrayal of public trust. But no, I couldn't have predicted that Ms. Bondi would flee the country rather than address her own words, or that so many others implicated in these schemes would suddenly find urgent business overseas. What happens next?" Stern pressed. "Justice," Crockett replied simply. "Not revenge, not political advantage, justice. The American people were lied to systematically and deliberately. Those responsible must be held accountable, regardless of their political affiliations or public profiles." "And your political future?" Stern asked with a knowing smile. "There's already talk of higher office in your future after this." Crockett shook her head. "I didn't do this to advance my career. I did it because it was right. Whatever comes next, that principle will guide my decisions." 1 week after Bondi's breakdown, a more complete picture had emerged. 3 former high-ranking officials had resigned from lucrative private sector positions. 2 others had announced they were cooperating fully with investigators. Financial records revealed a complex network of offshore accounts tied to individuals Bondi had advised. Jasmine Crockett returned to her district for a previously scheduled town hall meeting. The modest community center was overflowing, with supporters lined up around the block hoping to catch a glimpse of the congresswoman who had become a national symbol of accountability. Inside, after discussing local issues and constituent services, Crockett finally addressed the events in Washington. "People keep asking if I feel victorious," she told the crowd. "I don't. There's no victory in discovering that people entrusted with upholding our laws were actively undermining them. There's no triumph in watching someone's public persona collapse under the weight of their own deception." She paused, surveying the room filled with her constituents, the people who had believed in her long before she became a household name. "But there is hope," she continued. "Hope that truth still matters. Hope that accountability is still possible. Hope that when the powerful mislead us, they can still be called to answer for it." The applause was thunderous, but Crockett raised a hand to quiet the room. "This isn't the end of the story," she cautioned. "It's the beginning of a long process of restoring trust. And that work belongs to all of us, not just those of us in Washington," she said. As Crockett concluded her remarks, news alerts buzzed on phones throughout the audience. Pam Bondi had finally issued a statement from her Caribbean location, announcing her intention to cooperate with appropriate authorities to clarify misunderstandings and blaming political pressure for her decision to temporarily leave the country. But the narrative had already shifted irrevocably. What Bondi had once dismissed as a witch hunt was now recognized by most Americans as a legitimate investigation into serious wrongdoing. What she had characterized as political persecution was now widely understood as proper accountability. The final symbolic shift came 2 weeks after the confrontation, when a major news network that had previously featured Bondi regularly as a legal analyst announced a new contributor, a constitutional law expert who had long warned about the dangers of public officials misleading Americans about legal matters. "We need voices who speak truth, regardless of political convenience," the network president stated in announcing the new hire. Recent events have underscored the importance of factual accuracy and intellectual honesty in our legal analysis. The statement didn't mention Bondi by name. It didn't have to. 1 month after the hearing that changed everything, Jasmine Crockett sat in her congressional office reviewing legislation with her staff. The media requests had finally begun to taper off, allowing her to refocus on her core responsibilities. A small stack of newspapers on her desk told the ongoing story. Justice that expands probate. Following Bondi revelations indicted in whitening investigation poll, 76% of Americans say Crockett hearing restored faith in accountability. A knock at the door interrupted the meeting. Her chief of staff entered with an envelope bearing official Justice Department markings. "This just arrived, Congresswoman, hand-delivered." Crockett opened it carefully, read the enclosed letter, then looked up at her waiting staff. "The Attorney General is personally thanking this office for bringing forward evidence that has led to significant breakthroughs in their investigation," she explained, her expression serious. "But more importantly, they've uncovered additional documents that validate everything we presented. The truth is coming out, piece by piece." One young staffer couldn't contain her excitement. "You brought down Pam Bondi, that's going to be in the history books." Crockett shook her head firmly. "No, Pam Bondi brought down Pam Bondi." Her own words, her own actions, her own choices led to what happened in that hearing room. All I did was make sure the American people heard those words and saw those actions. She placed the letter carefully in a folder. "Our job isn't to bring down anyone, it's to bring the truth to light. Remember that distinction, because it matters." As her staff nodded soberly, Crockett's phone lit up with a news alert. Halfway around the world, Pam Bondi had finally emerged from seclusion to face reporters. The image showed a dramatically different woman. Her signature confidence replaced by nervous uncertainty as she read a prepared statement acknowledging regrettable communications and lapses in judgment. Crockett watched for only a moment before turning the phone face down on her desk. "Now," she said, returning to the legislative documents, "let's get back to the work the people sent us here to do." The confrontation that had captivated America had never been about personal victory for Jasmine Crockett. It had been about something far more fundamental. The principle that in a democracy truth matters, accountability matters, and no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how polished, no matter how protected, is above the obligation to deal honestly with the American people. In the end, that principle had prevailed, not because Crockett had outmaneuvered Bondi in a political chess match, but because when the truth was finally laid bare for all to see, it spoke for itself. If you found this explosive political confrontation revealing, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications to catch our next major political breakdown as it happens. We bring you the most dramatic moments in American politics, with deep analysis and exclusive behind-the-scenes details you won't find anywhere else.